G'day Dark Realmers, it's horror author and illustrator Michael J. Elliott here with you again, and in today's Dark Realm Diaries we're going to be counting down the top 10 psychopaths from movies and literature. Okay Dark Realmers, we're going to get to our list of top 10 psychopaths in books and movies in just a few minutes. But before that, I wanted to give you a basic overview of what a psychopath is, okay? Now firstly you need to understand that psychopathy or psychopathy is not an illness itself. It's a condition that's listed under a range of different conditions under what doctors term antisocial personality disorder, okay? And basically there's a range of illnesses that go along or go into that category, including, you'll be surprised, depression and anxiety, and that doesn't make you a psychopath because I suffer from anxiety and depression. It simply means that these are conditions that inhibit or prevent someone from operating within society at their most efficient. Now, as human beings, we're very social creatures, and we've developed a set of social emotions to help us operate in society and get along with each other. And for example, let's say you bump into someone in the street. Well, your first reaction is to say, sorry, okay? And those sort of social skills that we've developed help us to operate in a cohesive society. Now, as you can see by that diagram, Dark Realmers, all our emotions and our emotional responses are located in the frontal lobe of our brain. That's where we feel love and hate and greed and anger and all those sort of things, okay? And they're also where we have our social emotions, you know, our ability to empathise or feel sorry for someone in pain or an animal in pain. Well, the interesting thing about psychopathic personalities is they don't have this. It's missing from their brain. And doctors have actually found that when they've done neuroscans, that emotional centre isn't there. Now, I'll give you an example which is really creepy. Now, if you or I were to watch a video or a movie or a clip of a real person being beaten and tortured, our immediate reaction is, oh my God, I feel so sorry for that person, I wish I could help them, that sort of thing. That doesn't happen in a psychopathic brain. They feel nothing, absolutely nothing. And in fact, scientists and doctors have discovered that the opposite happens, that the pleasure center of their brain lights up, so they actually get pleasure seeing that. So if you were to watch a film of or see a clip of an animal being hurt or whatever, our heartbeat races, we feel an intense. The opposite happens with psychopaths. Their heartbeat slows down, their breathing is regular. So you can see that the rules or the emotions that we've developed aren't there in a psychopath, and that's what makes them really, really chilling. And it's not just that, Dark Realmers. Because psychopaths don't have empathy for other people, they can't see anything wrong with, you know, using people for their own advantage, killing people, raping, torture, all those things. There's no remorse, there's no guilt there. And that's frightening in itself. Also, psychopaths have no social conscience, as I've mentioned. They have no distinction between right and wrong like we do. And psychopaths also demonstrate characteristics where they're very glib, they can be very persuasive, very charming, and everything they do is ultimately for their own benefit. So if a psychopath pretends, you know, that they're going to help you in some way, it's not. It's just they're setting themselves up to do something to help themselves, okay? Now, that doesn't mean that everyone who has psychopath tendencies or who has been diagnosed as a psychopath goes on to be a murderer or a serial killer. There is actually 1% of the population in America are psychopaths. but it's only a very, very small percentage that goes on to commit crimes and murders and so forth. But this is the part of the population that has fascinated writers and filmmakers for many, many years, Dark Realmers. Also too, there's a difference, and very, very slight difference, between a sociopath and a psychopath. Now, psychopaths can fit in very well in society. Quite often, they hold high-paying jobs, they have positions of power and authority, and if they don't, they work in an area where they can achieve that. Sociopaths, on the other hand, tend to shun society. They don't like it, they tend to be loners. They stay on the fringes of society. Now, also, where a psychopath is very cool and calculating, a sociopath tends to be more reckless. So where a psychopath will go out and plan a murder down to the nth degree, a sociopath is more likely to do it in a fit of rage. And also, sociopaths, they do have a conscience, unlike the psychopath. They do have a conscience. They do know the difference between right and wrong, but their conscience is very, very weak, Dark Realmers, and in fact it's very easy for their mind to override it and say, oh, well, it doesn't matter if I do this because, you know, I really need to do this. Also too, sociopaths tend to have a twisted reasoning or deductive system, and that's where they can justify what they're doing by coming to a set of conclusions or a theory that is totally, well, what we would consider whacked out. Now, there was a case in America that demonstrates this perfectly, Dark Realmers. There was a man in the States who noticed that certain people died, and not long after these people died, there were earthquakes, and he reasoned to himself that if he actually went out murdering people on certain dates, he would prevent earthquakes. Now, for you and me, that's totally illogical, but for a sociopath, that makes perfect sense. So you can see, even though they're very similar, there is a couple of slight differences with the personality traits, and it's become very much within Hollywood and books and so forth that the term gets, you know, psychopath gets overused a lot. But that's just a rough definition, and I'll go on to explain how those definitions apply to the characters in our top 10 list, Dark Realm. Okay, Dark Realmers, if an adult psychopath is creepy, then a child psychopath is 10 times more so. And The Bad Seed, written by William Marsh, went on to become a Broadway play and then also a movie. And the role of Rhoda was played in both the stage production and the movie by Paddy McCormick, and the story is absolutely chilling. And this young child, basically the story involves a teacher who comes to the house because a young child, a classmate of Rhoda's, has drowned, and she was the last person to see this child. And of course Rhoda is all innocent and you know, very, very, very psychopathic in it, able to be glib. And later on, the mother finds the penmanship medal that the young drowned boy had and wonders how she got it. And she, of course, explains, he gave it to me, he lost a bet. But the story progresses and we find out more and more. In fact, there's a scene where she tries to burn her tap shoes because the tap, you know, little cleats or whatever they're called, matches the bruises found on the child's forehead. It gets more and more creepy, and when you see this actress, you know, hug her mother and say, oh, I love you a million billion times and everything, it is just really, really creepy. And she plays a psychopath so well, Dark Realmers, because she's totally incapable of thinking of anyone else except her own needs and her own wants. and she wanted this medal. She felt cheated, she should have had it, and she was going to get it. And then when a gardener in her apartment block jokes around saying, "Oh, I know you killed him," she literally takes it seriously, and he poses a threat, so she sets fire to his bedding. Things like that, and that's a perfect example of the psychopathic personality. And as I said, Dark Realmers, it's even more frightening because this is a beautiful looking young girl. Now, long before Michael Douglas did the nasty with Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction, we had Play Misty for Me, and it is one of the best psycho stalker thriller movies, even by today's standards. And Jessica Walker plays Evelyn Draper, who, after a one-night stand with Clint Eastwood, who plays Dave Garver, in the movie, she becomes obsessed with him, and she wants to keep him all to herself. She wants to be with him basically 24/7, and of course that's when he starts noticing, yeah, hey, this is a bit creepy, which is natural. We have that sort of instinct about people like Evelyn. And one of the scenes in the movie that shows how she is basically has some psychopathic tendencies, and also, but mainly has some sociopathic tendencies, is where she's stabbing his bedding furiously, and Clint Eastwood's housekeeper Birdie comes in and captures her. Well, without pausing, Evelyn Draper looks up and begins furiously slashing and stabbing away at the housekeeper. And this is terribly an important scene because it shows that her sociopathic nature in the movie. And as I said in our introduction, Dark Realmers, sociopaths tend to be not as cool, calm and collected. They tend to do things in a fury. They tend to do things in a blind rage. And this is an example of what happens in the movie, where she attacks this poor old housekeeper. And of course there are other scenes in the movie where she basically attacks Clint Eastwood while he's sleeping, and obviously he escapes that. But there are also areas in the movie where she shows the psychopathic tendencies, and that is where she actually captures Clint Eastwood's girlfriend Toby and ties her up, and tells Clint Eastwood, "I've got your girlfriend here." So she's very much planning her revenge on both of them, and it's a wonderful movie. Look, Jessica Walker is a brilliant, absolutely brilliant in this movie, and I'm sure you've seen it. If not, it was actually an original movie. It's not based on a book or anything like that, but it's freely available on DVD, and may also be available on Blu-ray, Dark Realmers. Check it out, okay? Okay, Dark Realmers, now I've got a confession to make. When I first saw this movie, I didn't know it was Brad Pitt playing the main character. Now, obviously, I knew it from the titles and the credits, but I had, at that stage, didn't have much idea of who Brad Pitt was. And it was only afterwards I went, oh my God, that's Brad Pitt. What an amazing performance. Well, in this film, he plays early Grayce, who's an ex-con, a drifter, and he lives in a trailer with his very childlike girlfriend, played by Juliette Lewis, and he plays the perfect psychopath. Now, the basic premise of the story is that David Duchovny's character is writing a book about serial killers and realises that he must get it finished very soon, and decides that, hey, maybe, you know, like going to some sites where there's been some actual serial killing would be a good idea. And his girlfriend decides that because she's a photographer, she may come in handy too, being you know, useful for filming and photographing some of the sites they're going to visit. Well, to help pay for the costs, he puts a notice up in the college notice board, and that's where it's seen by Early, who wants to leave the state, which of course is against his parole terms. And what happens is his landlord, who comes to demand, where's the rent you owe me, well, he decides to kill the landlord and then take up the offer with David Duchovny. Now, David Duchovny's girlfriend obviously looks at the pair of them because they're white trailer trash and thinks, hello, I don't like them. But David Duchovny's prepared to give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, in one scene in the movie, Brad Pitt's character of Early murders a man in the toilets at a gas station just for his money, and things begin getting more and more out of control. He begins to become fascinated with David Duchovny's girlfriend, and he insists that his girlfriend, the Juliette Lewis character, cut her hair in the same way. Now, there's a very, very strange relationship between David Duchovny's girlfriend and Early, because she catches them having sex in the car, and rather than be, oh, I'm shocked and offended, she finds it strangely erotic, and he looks up at her and grins. And this is one of those moments in the film where you can see how his psychopathic character is playing out. He's determined he's going to have her, and he knows that he's got her fascinated. And that's one thing about psychopaths. They can draw you in with some sort of charm. They may look, as Early does, look like, you know, trailer trash, but there's something terribly sexually arousing by him. Now, in one scene in the movie, he actually murders his girlfriend and turns around and says, well, I was getting sick of her anyway. And that just says everything about the personality of a psychopath. There's no guilt, no remorse, nothing like that. And he's quite prepared to, you know, find a new girlfriend, perhaps Duchovny's girlfriend, but whatever it is, he uses women and picks them up, and then when they start annoying him, or he's just tired of the whole relationship, he'll just murder them and get on with another one. One of the best movies you'll ever see, and as I said, a brilliant performance by Brad Pitt, who is a good actor in my opinion, and this is still one of my favourite road trip type serial killer movies. So that's available obviously on DVD and Blu-ray. And as I said, now you know a little bit more about the psychopathic personality traits. Take another look at these movies, because you'll pick up a lot more with that information that I've given you in the introduction, Dark Realmers. Now, what can we say about Misery that probably hasn't already been said 100,000 times, Dark Realmers? It's one of Stephen King's most popular books, and also went on to become a phenomenally successful movie. And a lot of that credit has to go to Kathy Bates, who plays the psychotic and unhinged Kathy Bates character, plays Annie Wilkes so well. And what's really striking about her performance is the way that she can go from being calm and rational to totally flying off the handle over the little things. And I'll give you an example of that. In a scene where James Caan's character realises that he's dealing with someone mentally unstable and agrees to write a new Misery novel, he asks her to go to the store and purchase some paper. Well, she comes back and it's not the type of paper that he's normally using, and she flies into a rage about that, and he tries to calmly explain to her, look, you know, this paper tends to smudge on the typewriter, and that's when he realizes that he's going to have to be very, very careful around Annie Wilkes. Now, when she reads the book that he's just completed about how the main character, Misery Chastain, dies, she is just absolutely ropeable with James Caan, and he tries to, you know, shrug it off and say, well, you know, Misery's spirit lives, and she says, I don't want her spirit. And that's when he's forced to do another novel where he can circumvent her death. Now, obviously, during this, he's trying to escape. He's trying to also avoid pushing her buttons, figuring out what makes her fly into a rage, what upsets her, all those sort of things. When you're dealing with a psychopath and you're trying to you know, stay alive and use your wits, that's what James Caan's doing in this movie, Dark Realmers. And the fact that he makes or tries to make an escape attempt, and she actually breaks his ankles and says, I love you and I have to do this. That's what's chilling about Annie Wilkes, is that she may not be a classic psychopath in the fact that she does feel something for James Caan, but she's obviously, her ideas of love and you know, companionship are way, way over the mark, and the fact that he may leave her at some stage is enough to tip her over the edge. And even when she decides that the best way out for them would be a beautiful murder-suicide where she kills him and then turns the gun on herself, shows how her view of reality and the real world is totally warped. Another thing that makes her character so incredibly frightening is also because, Dark Realmers, she's a former nurse. Now, we associate nurses with healing and caring. We don't associate them with psychotic behaviour. And that's why psychopathic women tend to be, well, in my opinion, a lot more terrifying, because we are hot-wired within our psyche to look at women as carers and nurturers, because they're mothers, grandmothers, they're teachers, all those roles that society's placed on women to look after other people and be caring and nurturing. And that's why when you come across a psychopathic character like Annie Wilkes in books or movies, they tend to be much, much more frightening. I had to read this book in my final year at high school for modern literature, and also all the students who were undertaking sociology or psychology had to sit in our school auditorium and watch the movie. Now, both the book and the movie absolutely horrified me, and author Anthony Burgess said he was in a state of near drunkenness when he wrote this book. And why it's so frightening, it's dealing with violence in a dystopian future where police and authorities are at a loss to control gang warfare and violence and so forth. And why Malcolm McDowell's character is so interesting is because he demonstrates the classic characteristics of a psychopath. The story is told through his eyes, and he, despite the horrible things he does, he sees himself as a hero. Also too, he's so narcissistic that when his gang members or his droogs dare to question his authority, he commits an act of violence against them. You know, I'm your leader, you will do what I say. Now, it's through those events that he gets sent to prison to undergo a treatment that will make him you know, not be able to commit acts of violence, and basically he won't be able to have sex either, because the thought, it's conditioning, and it's basically leaving him without any means even to defend himself, because any violence whatsoever will instantly cause this physical reaction where he feels sick to his stomach. Now, whilst he's in hospital, he plays the very caring and glib, you know, look, I'm here to help, sir, I'll do anything you want, sir. And that's very much a psychopathic tendency, that they will ingrain themselves or ingratiate themselves into positions where someone in authority can do something for them. Now, this is wonderful, frightening. Malcolm McDowell is just perfect in this role, and the society that Stanley Kubrick has created with his direction is also frightening, because we see, you know, buildings that are falling to pieces. We see a police force that are basically nothing more than thugs that have been recruited off the street, and it's frightening in that sense. And because Malcolm McDowell plays this character who is, on one hand, absolutely, you know, loves Beethoven, which we associate with nice feelings and feeling good. The fact that he likes that, but he's also quite capable of rape, murder, brutality. It's a dichotomy, and this is where it's a perfect example of a psychopathic character, and also a society where we tend to believe there are a lot of psychopathic characters around. Okay? Now, there's been two versions of this movie, Dark Realmers, based on the John MacDonald book. The first movie was made in 1962, and it starred Gregory Peck and Robert Mitchum. And the other one was made in 1991, and that starred Robert De Niro and Nick Nolte. And it's a perfect example of a psychopath stalking his victims and being very cool and very calculating about it the entire time. Now, the basic story stars or involves Max Grady, who is a violent rapist, and he is basically on trial, and his public defender is Sam Bowden, played by Nick Nolte, and Nick Nolte is so appalled by his crime that he actually buries evidence that would have had him acquitted. Well, during his 14 years in prison, Max Grady, the character, learns a lot about the law and legal loopholes and precedences and so forth and things like that. So he knows that his lawyer actually threw the case, and that's where he decides he's going to get his revenge. And he starts off very slowly, worming his way into the minds of Sam Bowden and his family. First off, he becomes friendly with their young daughter. Now, he never assaults her or physically threatens her. He acts very calming and very gentle, and she becomes fascinated with him and very sexually aroused by him too. And that's what his plan is. He doesn't actually touch her, but the fact that is going to totally freak out her parents is what he's planning on. Pardon me, Dark Realmers. He also poisons their dog, but of course there's no evidence that he was the perpetrator of the crime. But when it does escalate, what he does is horrific. He basically chats up a colleague of Sam Bowden's in a bar, and he takes her back, breaks her arm, really assaults her very badly and rapes her. Now, obviously, you know, this is where it becomes very intense, and but she is too ashamed to press charges. But Sam and his family decide to try and escape his influences, and they go to their houseboat. But this is where Robert De Niro has basically cornered them, and he because of his self-righteousness and his belief that, you know, like, yes, okay, you know, I raped that woman, but it's your job to defend me and get me off. So he has no sense of regret or remorse about his actions. He is more outraged and more upset the fact that his lawyer didn't do his job and get him off. And he quotes a lot of passages and references to his lawyer and his family when he's basically captured and imprisoned them, to show his superiority in terms of his knowledge of the law and his moral belief that he is right. Now that's a that's a classic psychopathic trait, where psychopaths, as I've said, they feel no remorse, no regret, but they always feel that they are morally superior and also intellectually superior. They have a very narcissistic personality. Now, if you see Robert De Niro in this performance, he's not classically handsome. Now, Robert De Niro is a classically handsome actor, but what he did in this role was he didn't actually wear false teeth. He actually went the distance and had his dentist alter his teeth to make him more creepy and more violent looking and very unsettling. But of course he's covered in head to toes in tattoos, and that also makes him look very predatory too, Dark Realmers. And this is a great example of not only a wonderful performance, but also how a psychopath meticulously plans how they're going to stalk a victim, the steps they're going to take to unnerve them, and he knows very well what he's doing, inch by inch and step by step, is gradually unraveling the security and the feeling of you know, everything's okay by Sam and his family. And it's the rape scene that culminates in, okay, this is what's going to happen to you, he's basically saying. And it's a wonderful movie, one of the best psychological reads too, you'll also find. So do check that one out, Dark Realmers. And also, just as a comparison, check out the 1962 movie. Because Hollywood's evolved, just like everything else does, you'll find that there'll be changes. Now, it's just as psychologically disturbing, but of course, Hollywood couldn't get away with a lot back then as compared to what they did in 1991. So it's great to check those two out, and also check it out in terms of the book, which I'm pleased to say that both the movies followed the book very, very closely. Now, this is a really interesting one, Dark Realmers, because even though we don't see John Doe, who is played by Kevin Spacey, until right at the end of the movie, and he has a very small part, it's very intricate, because we get to know about this character through various scenes. And even though this character is very psychopathic in the fact that he meticulously plans out his crimes, he plans out the method of how they're going to be carried out. He's also shows sociopathic tendencies, because there's a scene in the movie where Morgan Freeman discovers his journal and he starts reading from it, and in the killer's own handwriting and in his own words, he says how he was boarding the subway and someone just casually started a conversation with him and how that physically made him sick. And that gives us a very, very strong clue and indication that he basically despises society. He has no time for it. He looks at society as human garbage, that he is superior to them. He needs to make a stand about these people, and that's why he very cleverly kills them according to the 7 deadly sins. And the first one, where we have a grossly obese man, who is forced to eat himself to death. And these are all people that he sees in day-to-day life and he absolutely despises. He feels they're not worth being alive, or should be in society. So that gives you a very, very strong indication of how he feels and his attitude towards society. And of course, this character is very much a loner. We don't actually see him interact with anyone. And when he actually hands himself in to the police station, it's all part and parcel of his final ultimate goal. And that is to enact the final deadly sin, which is wrath. And that's what he tries to get Brad Pitt's detective character to undertake. Poor Norman. His personality got whittled away so much that he actually became his mother. Now, it's a bit difficult to really classify Norman Bates as a psychopath, because he actually lost his whole personality and developed, dissociative personality disorder, which is the term they use now instead of split personality. But in the beginning, Norman Bates actually murdered his mother and her lover. Now, that would have shown some psychopathic tendencies just there, because he would have had to plan it out and arrange it in a very detailed fashion. But then we have the other side of it, where he felt such remorse and such guilt over her death that he basically tried to keep her alive. So even though we can't classify him as a pure psychopath, the fact that his other personality, the personality of mother, actually does display some psychopathic tendencies. And also we have to remember too that there's one thing I didn't point out to you, Dark Realmers, that psychopaths are born, but sociopaths are made. Now, usually something in childhood, a traumatic experience, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional abuse, will help shape a sociopathic personality. And this is obviously what's happened to our poor old Norman. Yep, Dark Realmers, as the title suggests, this character is a perfect psychopath. The character of Patrick Bateman displays all the classic psychopathic traits. He's successful, he has a high image of himself, he's obsessed with his the perfection of his own image, and that's shown in the movie, where he describes his daily routine of how many moisturizers he goes through, his exercise routine. And even when he's having sex, it's not about pleasuring his partner. He looks at himself in the mirror at the back of the headboard and admires his own physique. Now, this character is very successful, and as I said, they tend to be working in professions where they are highly successful, and he's very competitive. He tries to outdo all his fellow workers in terms of the cut of his suit, his business cards. He he wants to be basically perfect, and he sees himself in that regard. And also he's just totally bored. He is just totally bored with having the perfect lifestyle, because it's not what he wants, and he craves those murders, those murdering impulses. Now, whether or not they actually happen in the book and the movie, or whether it's just him building up those psychotic and those psychopathic thoughts, is very much left up to the reader and also the viewer. And there's been a lot of discussion in literature and in books and so forth about, yes, he did, no, he didn't. Well, I'm not going to get into that there, those sort of issues here, Dark Realmers. Needless to say that Christian Bale plays this role perfectly, and his perception of the world and his perception of himself definitely earn him a place in the top 10 psycho. Okay, Dark Realmers, now, although I didn't have any agenda when I compiled this list, I didn't put each entry according to any sort of criteria. I did have to save the #1 spot for Hannibal the Cannibal, because he has become the stereotype or the archetypal psychopath. And what makes him even more chilling as a character is that he's a qualified psychiatrist, so he has the means and the ways to get into people's heads. Now, he does come across as very charming, of course very educated, but he's also a gourmet, a connoisseur, and that's what makes him chilling too, Dark Realmers, is, someone who seems so urbane can be so deadly. And but he also has morals, okay? Now, this is, I know that sounds like it goes against the psychopathic personality, but it's a sense of his own personal right and wrong. And as Jodie Foster explains, no, he wouldn't do that. He has honour, it would offend him. And there's one scene where she's finished visiting him in jail, and the prisoner next to her has masturbated and flinged some semen at her. Now, that offends Dr. Hannibal so much that he actually begins talking to the prisoner Miggs all through the night and convinces him to swallow his own tongue, because morally he finds that very, very offensive. Now, this is what makes Hannibal Lecter the perfect psychopath. And as I mentioned, how psychopaths, their breathing and their heart rate stays the same, well, that's amply demonstrated in Silence of the Lambs, where the scene where he actually kills one of his guards and, casually swinging, a baton and killing this guard, all to the strains of classical music. And it's almost like he's in an enraptured state when he's doing it. And they even mentioned how that he could, bite off someone's tongue, and his blood pressure and his heart rate would not increase. So this is why Thomas Harris has created one of the most chilling characters in literature. Now, I've read all of the books, including the prequel, Red Dragon, which introduces us to the character of Hannibal Lecter, and it was originally made as a movie called Manhunter, but then it got remade as Red Dragon, starring Rafe Fine as the psychopathic killer, and Edward Norton as the detective, and it's a brilliant sequel that sets up perfectly Silence of the Lambs. Now, some of the others in the series were a bit hit and miss. I particularly didn't enjoy Hannibal. I felt it was just cashing in on the success of Anthony Hopkins, and I also didn't enjoy Julianne Moore's performances as Clarice Starling. To me, it's got to be Jodie Foster or nothing, and I think quite rightly she turned down this role because she may have seen the same elements that I do in this movie. But regardless of that, he is a wonderfully written character, a wonderfully fleshed out character. So here's to you, Hannibal. Congratulations, you've made it to our top spot in our psychopaths list. Okay, Dark Realmers, now I know that's one of the longest videos I've ever produced, but we had a lot of psychopaths to get through, don't forget. Now, if you're a writer, I hope I've given you some factual information that may help you when you're creating a character or crafting something in your latest book. Now, if you're a reader, I hope I've given you some information that will actually help you enjoy books more. Now, there is a heap of books and movies out there dealing with psychopaths and sociopaths. I recommend that you Google top 10 psychopaths or psychopath movies, and you will be presented with a huge list to choose from. Also check out the books too, okay? Now, if you've enjoyed this video, please hit me with a like. I do appreciate that very, very much. But also, if there's something you'd like to comment on, whether you've discovered something, you've got perhaps a bit of information that you could share with the other Dark Realmers, don't forget to leave a comment. And I really appreciate it if you could subscribe to us, okay? So until next time, Dark Realmers, this is Michael J. Elliott reminding you, stay in the light, Dark Realmers.